to make a more substantial business impact. To discuss on such an interesting topic, India Diversity Forum brings to you this exclusive panel discussion on the topic Millennials and Taking the New Challenge in D&I. To begin this Charcha, I would like to welcome our esteemed speakers for the session. Sachin Tiwari, VP and Human Capital, Farmart. Sujata Sudhindra, Head HR, Admin and BE, ABFL. Head Diversity and Inclusion, Aditya Birla Capital. Sonia Almeida Source, Head of Diversity and Inclusion and Employer Branding, Volvo Group, India. And our moderator for the session, Karuna Iyer, General Manager, LNOD, VFS Global Private Limited. Thank you to all the speakers for accepting the invitation and being a part of this panel discussion. Karuna, all over to you now.
Thank you very much. Am I clearly audible to everybody? Yeah. Great. Okay. So a very warm welcome to this discussion. And like we all know today, being in this space and working in the space of diversity and inclusion in our organizations and outside, millennials really value inclusion not as an abstract ideal that is good to do, but as a critical tool that enables business competitiveness and growth. These young professionals today are most traditionally diverse, if you asked me, and diverse in more than any other generation that we've seen in the history of times. And thanks to the diversity and inclusion they've been exposed to the part of their growing up, education, or their work experience. Happy to have this conversation with all of you. And let me, on that note, put my first question out to the panel today. Given this background, how critical is generational perspective on diversity and inclusion within an organization?
Okay. Hi, guys. This is Sachin Tiwari here. I'm firstly glad to be part of this panel. I want to thank the India Diversity Forum to kind of give me the opportunity to speak here. It is incrementally and increasingly becoming the hot topic now. It's taken the forefront of most corporate environments on how we look at diversity and inclusion. Now, to answer the question, right, how generational opinion is very, very critical, and what does it do for organizations? I think there are multiple advantages if you look at it from a standpoint that having a right balance of generation is very critical. But what kind of dynamic, what kind of culture, what kind of environment you allow or you kind of co-create, what are the positive outputs that we can gain out of it if there is a fine balance. Now, I think one of the most critical ones, I think every business, every environment has a customer that we cater to, or somebody that we are working towards providing an experience. Now, when you have generational dynamics and you have people across generations, as a part of your organization, I think it gives you diverse experience of managing, again, customer base coming across age group, the expectations they have. Maybe a young customer might look at your product, your service in a very different fashion to a person who's on the second stage of their lives. And hence, having that perspective as a user is extremely critical. So to look at it from different lens is very, very important. If you look at internally, to look at it from an organizational standpoint, you kind of build a pipeline of ready leadership. You have seasonal leaders, people who have been tenured, been there, done that. That experience matters a lot. Now, while a lot of companies are moving towards hiring a lot of freshers, interns, millennials, or even Gen Zs for that matter, for them to become future leaders, they are going to need that support, need that encouragement, need that experience hand around, and hence the right mix is extremely critical. So that's point number two. If you look at the problem solving aspect of it, maybe a millennial who had larger access to technology, Gen Z who is pretty much on social media or platforms these days. Those guys have a different outlook to solving problems. While I read a quote, and this is very interesting one by Ivan Pavlov, to get a new idea, read an old book. And that made me feel that yes, the experienced hand can always give you a fresh idea, a different perspective. We all have seen a lot of old fashioned coming back, so old is never out of fashion. And that's a fine balance that we need to have, the young and old, energy, ideas, innovation, technology, but experience and a structured approach is equally important to get to the end of it. Last but not the least, it does somewhere as a byproduct works for organization from a branding standpoint, from a brand USP standpoint. So if you're able to bake that fine balance of experience and youth, give equal importance, manage expectations right, communicate well, create enough awareness, and harbor a culture environment which allows you to treat them equally. Don't create stuff that makes that age segment feel old or extremely young. Just speak to them, behave with them in the same manner, put them in the same pedestal. I think there are a lot of benefits which I've observed during my experience of 19 years.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Sachin. I think that's very interesting perspective, which brings me to asking this group, saying, based on your experience, can you elaborate on what workforce diversity really means for the Gen X today?
Probably, I think you meant Gen Y, Karuna. So since you're talking about the...
Happy to hear perspective on Gen Y as well. So
yeah. So I would like to start with a word of caution, as today we are going to be talking about millennials or Gen Y. While we have these descriptions of various generations like Gen X, Y, Z, etc., it's important to note that these descriptions of each generations are generalizations which can possibly guide us, to refine our policies and practices. And we shouldn't get into the trap of stereotyping either during, say, interview process or promotions, etc. Else it would lead to unconscious bias in our employment practices. I myself belong to the millennial generation and don't like the idea of being bucketed just because of the year I'm born in. I would like my individualism to be respected because each one of us is unique. However, it's important for organizations to take the time to understand these newer and younger generations and look at what changes would need to be made. Now, I read a Deloitte millennial survey the other day, and I understand that Gen Y or the millennials, they are expected to make 75% of the workforce by 2025. Now, that is a major chunk of the workforce to consider. And for organizations looking at attracting and retaining millennials, inclusion and diversity is a must. Now, millennials, in fact, take diversity as a given because they have grown in the age of the internet, where you have access to people across the globe. And we all know that they use a lot of these social collaboration tools. And millennials would consider organizations who value D&I and are intentional about it. So they wouldn't hesitate to change companies for this. And this thinking only gets amplified with the even newer generation, which is the Generation Z, who hasn't seen life without the internet. Now, in the same survey that I had read, they also mentioned that when it comes to defining diversity, millennials look at it well beyond the integration of these demographic differences like age, region, etc. Now, they consider diversity as the blending of these unique perspectives within the team, which we refer to as cognitive diversity that was talked about during the introduction. Now, that means the millennial generation defines diversity and inclusion quite differently from the other older generations. And for millennials, it is about diversity of thought, freedom of expression, which comes because people they may come from different upbringings, socioeconomic status, and geographies. Now, working with millennials, in my experience, I see that they don't think twice about working with people from demographic diversities. And in fact, they look forward to working collaboratively in teams. And inclusion kind of comes naturally compared to previous generations. Now, they look for an inclusive culture, which is positive and supportive. Now, they view diversity and inclusion in the workplace like that conducive environment, which is giving a voice to all individuals across the levels. And that could be even the newest, latest hire who would have different perspectives on any given concern.
Right. I think I completely agree with what you're saying, Sonia. Like we said at the beginning, one is cognitive diversity. The other is the fact that the upbringing is so diverse in nature. The exposure has been so diverse in nature that there is a default setting of diversity and inclusion in the generation, so to say. Thank you so much for that. Which also comes to how do we deal with what's happening in the world today, and in this world of quiet quitting, what according to you can we as managers do to promote an inclusive and equitable workplace that can really help improve retention of employees, or retention rates, so to say?
Right. So to answer that, Karuna, I think there are a lot of things we should first stop doing, and then think about what we should do for sure. What you should stop doing, I think one of the points Sonia fantastically brought up is relook at your hiring strategy. One of the things is stop asking the date of birth. I mean, how is that relevant, right? I mean, it's the job,
right, or
the
even
skill set.
bucketing people, right?
Yeah. I mean, I completely echo sentiments, Sonia's sentiments here, because I'm also a millennial, and I don't like the fact that Gen Z maybe look at me and say, oh, he's about 15 years older, or 10 years older, right? The fact is, eventually, the hiring strategies have to be looked at. Let's look at people's skill set more than their age. Let's also ensure there are people who are on the other side of 40s, maybe first half of 50s. How often organizations are still investing in talking to them about how they feel, versus the amount of time we invest with new incumbents, the management trainees, the GETs who come in. And I'm not saying we shouldn't do that. I'm saying, is there a balance to the time investment? Are there unintentional attempts of steps that we end up taking, which might hurt sentiments of people who've been in the organization, for some time, and they are pretty much towards the second half of their careers. What we should do, right? Look at starting with looking at benefits that we offer. What are the kind of benefits which kind of cater or appeal the needs of somebody who's seasoned senior versus a newcomer? It might sound very elementary, but we need to start listening to people. I know, I mean, it's a very HR jargon, listen to people, right? But how often we really do that to solve things versus listening to people? And it's purely built on communication. Create awareness that and both ways. A seasoned professional doesn't look at a junior person and passes a side remark or creates an environment where they feel, oh, this guy is a junior ranked employee and doesn't know anything how to be done. Reverse is equally true. A junior ranked person gives that level of respect and knows how to kind of handle or conduct themselves around a seasoned professional. So some of this is pure communication awareness that you create. It's also important that there's a high level of transparency that we are able to create in the system by creating constant mentoring. How do we do that? Align individual coaches to people who feel the need of knowing how to handle themselves, irrespective which side they are. Um, Sometimes people are not sure how to handle difficult conversations. I've been part of teams where team members have been slightly older in age within the team, and then it can get difficult when there's a tough conversation to be had. Some of these are facets that whether it's people managers, senior leaders need to be coached on. And if they're already aware, there's no harm in doing a coaching awareness session workshop every once in a while. So as many platforms we can create, whether it's creating a customized benefits package, whether it's creating transparency in the and awareness in the environment, whether it's training people, whether it's rethinking hiring strategies, all of those measures in isolation can contribute towards retention, can contribute towards recognition of the fact the organization is aligned on the D&I part and focused on it to not make it a one stop here and there effort, but it's a continual ongoing exercise.
Right, that makes sense, Sachin. And having speaking of that and gradually moving into how millennials are filling leadership roles, more and more. What are some of the key strategies you think they can apply to improve DEI in their respective organizations?
So let me take up that.
Lovely to hear you, Sujata. Yes.
Question, Karuna. I think two things we should do. Let's actually separate, when we are talking about diversity, it's not about gender. Like what exactly Sonia said, it's all about, diversity of thoughts. It's very important for us to understand, keep the customer as your focus and look at talent. Don't bring in gender right now. Don't bring in generations right now. Yeah, that is, if I'm saying that, I'm pitching one against the other. That's not the intention here. If I'm saying I'm a truly customer-centric organization, I should say, do I have the representation of that in my organization? If innovation and creativity is the key, do I have that representative as my employees here? My future customers are today in school and colleges. So am I ready? So it's not question of Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, millennials. I don't think so. How do you integrate wisdom? How do you integrate technology? How do you ensure that multi-generational work can actually impact the society and organization at large? Now, coming back to how do you ensure that there's the D&I, we all have rattled off numbers saying, yeah, by 2030, you'll have 1 billion people working. So 2-3 things all of us need to unlearn. It's very easy to say, yes, I am going to, create the environment. And I'm sure Sonia and Sachin will agree. Empowerment at the junior most level is very important. And 2 sets of people will always tell you facts. One is your frontline employee and one is your customer. And largely we presume the junior most employee will belong to, it's a presumption, will belong to, millennial or Gen Z. Are we giving our employee enough freedom to understand the customer? I'll give you an example, live example of what we did in our organization. In the BFSI space at Aditya Birla Capital, we wanted to, create a white paper to understand about diversity and inclusion. Simple, and diversity does not mean gender to us. This project I had given to 2 of my team members who just graduated from college. It was a big event because we were working with a consultant and calling most of the BFSI organizations. You had to just clearly articulate to these 2 youngsters saying, this is the ask. And now you all come back with a framework. When we are saying that, you can't be breathing down their necks and saying, is it done? How is it happening? No, I think you have to create the framework, give empowerment and allow them to go ahead, experiment and explore. They may fail, it's okay. These are certain small processes. When there is any critical projects, I think experience is very, very important, especially in the financial services place, because you would have seen different cycles. For example, collections. My collections manager, let's say in Renukot, will be 49 or 50 years, but he or she can exactly identify a pin which has fallen in the sea, because collection people will know their customers very well. I can't bring in a youngster there, and my youngster may not want to do a collection job, but with his his or her ability to work with technology, can I integrate experience and technology and figure out if I can do more of analytics? I think that's the way organization should look. You can't now anymore look at hierarchy. You have to look at empowerment. How many times is your team member coming to you asking for permission? The number of clicks for the customer should be less. The number of times your team member coming to you should be less. That is as simple as that. That is the best thing, and we don't have to do anything else. For all cross-functional projects, can you make your organization inclusive? It is not one generation against the other. We can't throw away Gen X, Gen Y, who has seen life at, very different circle. So how do you integrate? So how does this organization make in their collaterals inclusive language? That's very important. Let me give you one more example. We all look at, retired bank managers, retired RBI managers. Why? Because they have experience. So I think all of us should just get away from this saying that one is against the other and see how can we make them work together and allow them to take decisions.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting and very realistic perspective, Sujata, which brings me to ask you, because we're talking about diversity and how we think of diversity, while cognitive diversity isn't really a new concept, is it a reality in most organizations?
The cognitive diversity?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'll step back from even cognitive diversity. The ability for managers to listen is very, very important. Because most of the managers who have 20-25 years of experience will have I know all attitude. Even before my youngster completing a sentence, I would have cut and said, just do 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, it is a challenge. It is definitely a challenge because we are used to in a certain way. Unlearning takes time. At the same time, if the youngster can actually add value, which again, the organization needs to encourage, it will happen. It needs a lot of sensitization from both the end, and it's not going to be easy. So in certain critical projects, how do you bring these 2-3 generations together, and make them work? I think we have to give space, we have to integrate, and we have to customize. It's a fine balance, Karuna. It's not going to be easy. So there will be some projects where, Gen X and Gen Y will have their own strength. And there are certain projects where Gen Z, nobody can beat them or touch them.
Absolutely.
So it's the organization, responsibility to call out. And for each one of us to take that one step, because most of us in the senior leadership position, I was just telling to someone, I have, millennials at home and at work. So for me, I don't feel any different. So the same thing I hear both the places. You have to give them the brief and just allow them to work. They're very, very clear, like what Sonia said. I don't like to be labeled as, as a women candidate or as a millennial. Yes. Just have your governance mechanism and step back. They have clarity. They have enough clarity and they're very, very accountable. So we also need patience.
I think that's a good learning as well, saying unlearn and patience are some of the key words that we could take away from that. Sonia, was there something you wanted to add on this?
Since you asked about the cognitive diversity, I second whatever Sujata has just mentioned about empowerment, etc. However, I would just like to add some perspectives out over there. When we think of workforce diversity, we probably, usually think of the kind of diversity that we can easily see, or at least that we can identify easily, like age, gender, nationality, etc., which we are all tracking. However, besides these demographic diversity, we also have the cognitive diversity that we have been talking about. And as I had mentioned earlier, cognitive diversity, as most of us know, it's basically the diversity in the way employees think and solve problems. And that could include a variety of people with different thought patterns, ideas, and mental perspectives. And this is not a diversity that as an organization we can choose to ignore. Now, one may challenge that if we look at different demographic diversities, then probably the cognitive diversity may come by default. Now, that may or may not be the case, because even if you're hiring, say, in a team, people from different genders, age, etc., but if they are from the same university, the cognitive diversity may not be there. I'm not sure, I'm not saying that for certain it may not be there, but most likely it may not be there. So I believe that the organizations which are doing an awesome job building an inclusive culture, they are directly or indirectly also considering cognitive diversity already. Now, when we talk about unconscious bias, we always advise our people to be cognizant of the biases, like, for example, the similarity bias, wherein we tend to like people we feel we are similar to us. Now, so we advise our leaders and employees to include diverse personalities, people with different thinking styles, different problem solving capabilities, so on and so forth. So even if we are not using the term cognitive diversity, we are still considering it. Now, I'll give you an example of what we have been doing in Volvo Group in India. Now, from the past 2 years, we have worked on a culture rejuvenation journey, which we call Culture FI. And inclusion is a key tenet of it. So we have involved people from across all levels to relook at various elements of our culture. For example, we looked at behaviors to demonstrate and unproductive behaviors to shed. Now, all these included a lot about collaboration, empathy, being appreciative, which is about considering an inclusive environment to include people with different perspectives, experiences, values, ideas, philosophies, so on and so forth, which is all cognitive diversity. So I believe that most of the organizations have made great progress on the visible diversities like gender, persons with disabilities, religions, etc., to build that inclusive culture around these diversities. And we should not lose focus on that and just concentrate on cognitive diversity. It should go hand in hand, and that's the shift that we all need to make.
So, Karuna, just to add what Sonia was saying, what can organizations do and what exactly we did is all critical projects. We have a platform where we at Aditya Birla Group and Capital, we share all the critical projects. And we will say this is the criteria required, criteria not from age, gender, diversity thought processes, the skill set required for the project completion. Now it is for them to figure out who will do what, and somebody can come and put them together. Yeah, it's like a squad that comes, they complete the project and they move on, which means the organization is benefited in two ways. There's no restriction of any criteria like age, gender, geography. Secondly, what happens is this leads to a lot of innovation. So the junior most person who may belong to Gen X also is going to contribute, because there's no other criteria which is restricting them. There's no hierarchy which is restricting them. Secondly, what is happening is you are building cross-functional teams. And thirdly, you're knowingly or unknowingly, we understood that we were actually building a lot of gigs within the organization.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So today, now coming back to diversity of women, let's say women have to go on maternity leave. We understood that we are building pipeline of gigs within the conglomerate. Let's say one of our women employee in finance team, she's going on a maternity leave and she'll not be available for 1 year. Our gig is ready here to manage her role for the next 1 year, because the gig also does not want to stay in the same role for long.
Correct.
So the role is only going to be managed. So now there's an in-house consultancy, which is actually, growing.
Yeah,
I think the best way for you to definitely build your cognitive
pipeline. Yeah, cognitive diversity and pipeline, right? Isn't that the most beautiful way?
Yeah.
And it's done with very little compulsion or effort. It's done straight from a space of willingness and innovation. So much to say that if there is a cross-functional junior employee coming in to do a certain role that they choose to do an experiment, they're just going to contribute that much more to that role.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful way of looking at it. So I think really what I want to conclude by asking all of you, and it's been a lovely discussion, but I want to throw this out open to all three of you, saying um, we've already given enough credit to the fact that we're talking DEI at various platforms today. And that's exactly why we're evolving and we're moving step by step. It's a long journey, like we already said through this talk. It's not a one step, it's not a quick fix, it's a journey. But in our millennial spaces today, how do we keep making progress really? How do we keep taking that one step at a time? How do you think we can continuously make progress as we move ahead? And like I say, progress is not generally or generically in one direction, and it can be so diverse in the way we evolve.
Yeah.
How do you think we can evolve and keep making progress?
So I'm sorry, let me just take this up because I'm working on that project. So our chairman, Mr. Birla, said that how do we ensure the first 10 years are going to be the best 10 years for an employee who is joining us? So it's a guarantee that as an organization, we are going to give to these youngsters on the appointment letter. We are just working on the project. The first 10 years. So how many role movements we will make? What are the skills we will ensure will be, inculcated? And, we are saying how many behavioral skills, how many progressive, that is, what are the skills required for the next 10 years? Because not skills for here and now. For example, if you look at, analytics, if you look at digital literacy, these are progressive skills next 10 years. So what are the behavioral competencies? What are the functional competencies? What is the career growth you're going to give? How will you assess? And how will you ensure that the person is taking risk? The organization has to take risk, the individual has to take risk. So it's a 10-year, career pathing that we are going to give to our youngsters here. And it is the responsibility of the managers. Who is the manager who's most nurturing people and willing to let go of his or her employee after 3 years?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And that is how we said, how will we create gigs? How will we create consultants? How will we create specialists? And how will we ensure fungibility across the conglomerate?
Very interesting. Yeah. And like you said, more than everything else, it's about letting go and letting the employee evolve in their journey as well once in 3 years, and knowing how to keep your pipeline ready to let go and to keep moving.
Receive also. To let go and receive. Both are important.
Both are very important. Very interesting. Thank you, Sujata, for sharing that. Sachin, Sonia, any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I'm going to take a shot at it. I think what we are doing here, and we are an agri-tech, company. We want to ensure that everybody who comes, joins us, understands the values and the culture that we are, kind of harboring, and how they can be a part of it. We have started a program, especially for the frontline, and this was completely our CEO's brainchild, that let's build a 4-year progression plan where standard practice, people get to know jumps and levels and compensations where they will get to in a certain period of time. We are building a program where we tell them what can they expect aspirationally, what can we do for them as an organization, whether it's if somebody's if it's a younger person journey towards getting married, can we help there? Somebody wants to buy a house, how can we help? Now these are aspirations people have, and we are willing to kind of build a plan and say we will support, partner, and deliver on these aspirations. So we are not just looking at your professional growth. We are just not looking at your promotions and designation, which is more societal approval on your profession, but we also want to look at your aspiration. And we are rolling out a program where we will take, starting with our frontline ambassadors, because like Sujata said, Sonia said, I think the work happens there. We all sit in fancy offices and we talk about a lot of strategy. Those guys are the ones running the hard yards, and you got to start there. So you make them feel you are an equal owner, you are a decision maker, you are a brand ambassador. Every decision you make makes our brand look good every single day. So how can we make them feel we are securing their future, not today, not tomorrow, next 4 or 5 years? Gives them material reason to hang around. There is an emotional connect and bond that builds. And we are willing to live up to that promise if you have to give that documented to each and every frontline employee. So those are programs we are doing. There's another project, one of our logistics head kind of started. For us, a lot of our produce moves from one state to another via trucks. Now, these truckers have their own agencies from where you empanel them. The coordination, the collaboration with these guys, we looked at that role, stereotyped in most industries that men should manage it. We figured out when we hired a couple of women employees, those guys were phenomenal in getting conversions. They were phenomenal in getting empanelment, and we just broke the stereotype. Now today we have all women employees doing that. So like the conversation's been going on, there shouldn't be a stereotype in my mind about a particular role. Let's look at the best skilled person and let's give them the opportunity irrespective of the gender. So we've been running some of those initiatives internally and they've been working fabulously for us. We are keen on evolving on some of more similar programs.
Just to add from,
yes, Sonia.
Yeah, just to add from my side as well. I mean, we in Volvo Group as well hire a lot of millennials, and yes, we are not bucketing over here, but then in general, we do look at bringing in some harmony across various generations that we have within the organizations. So specifically for millennials and other generations as well, we do roll out employee value proposition, which I believe most of the organizations would be having. And there we talk a lot about culture, and the other things that millennials look for, that's the innovation. I mean, whoever wants to join us wants to work on the latest technology, be it electromobility, autonomous vehicles, so on and so forth. And when it comes to our culture, we have a initiative over here where we talk about a lot about on living our company values, so that these values just don't remain as artifacts on the wall. So we look at actionables from our new joiners and existing employees as well, as to how the values can they live the values in each and every aspect of their work and interaction with colleagues across all levels. We have a lot of culture roadshows that we have, where we have continuous dialogues and conversations where the leader gets along him or her their full team, and they have like these conversations in our culture roadshows. So we are looking at barriers that we can remove to bring in that as an incentive for the millennials and other generations. Simple things like what Sachin also had mentioned at the start of what managers could do, removing hierarchies as much as possible, making it flatter. And as Sujata mentioned, giving more and more empowerment to our people. I mean, today what we look at is ownership. So as long as you have empowerment, then only the ownership comes. Otherwise, where is the ownership? The ownership lies at the leaders, the so-called designated leaders desk, where the decision-making power lies. So these are the small things that we are doing at Volvo.
I think that's lovely of you to share, Sonia. It reminds me of the fact that when you said how we instill diversity as a value in the organization, we at VFS have made diversity, equity, inclusion a part of our competency framework across levels, saying that whichever action that you take, whatever that you do, this behavior is a default that we encourage through the organization. I think all of us in that sense are making our contributions in the space and continuing to evolve. Thank you so much for sharing all of your thoughts on
just one more thing I want to add. Just one more thing I want to add, Karuna. I think at the base of it, we might all have ideas. We might all want to do a lot of stuff. I think generally it's more about listening. I think we spoke about listening. You create platforms where we allow people to speak what they want. As many platforms, as many channels. When you talk about breaking hierarchies, how often and how frequent the senior management of the company is available to speak right to the base staff. Yes, we have a lot of meetings and a lot of other stuff that goes on. But I don't think there's an excuse to not taking time out and interacting where the action is. And the more you hear them, the more you talk to them, I think that's where you get to know how you keep evolving on this journey and what's your next move going to be to get it and make it a even field.
I think we all agree to that, Sachin. Thank you so much. Over to you, Shubhangi and Ketki, to open Q&A to any questions that have come up.
Yes, Karuna, we do have an audience question. Just a second, I'll tell you.
That's Sachin. Thank you so much.
Yes, the question is, what techniques or the parameters can apply to evaluate the effectiveness of D&E in an organization?
Can I take that up?
Yeah, please go ahead, Sujata.
Okay. So there are 2-3 things, there is nothing called techniques and parameters. That's an output. I don't think we should be looking at an output. The input is, am I ready to have a progressive, sustainable, and profitable organization? That's the first question all organization and senior management should ask. If so, what is the culture that we would like to build? Second, once we say, yeah, we are standing up for D&I, then unless and until you will not have processes, systems, and governance in place, nothing can happen. So you should have policies in place. Yeah. The third thing is you have to sensitize the organization to have, D&I as a culture. And when you're talking about gender, or you're talking about gigs, or you're talking about PWD, how do you, harness their talent is very important. Then call out for clear career paths and create enablers. Let me just talk about women for an example. When they want, creche is mandatory by the government. So most of the organization they're supposed to do whatever they had to do for creche. But during pandemic, that was not possible. So we said that we will give nanny reimbursement for women. No questions asked. From 6 months to 6 years, you will get nanny reimbursement for women. And that's how we have ensured. And we also said we will fast track women careers. And this governance mechanism, while personally, I wouldn't like to, have some roles and call this diversity roles, but in order to ensure that there's a level playing field, you have to do it. Your output will come provided your input is very clear. The culture part is very clear. So there's no one technique which can work. So it has to be at the leadership team, at your SMT level, and then your processes, policies, systems, sensitization, and then ensuring that you're creating enablers for women and for, D&I. And this should be called out as a scorecard-based mechanism later.
Shubhangi, we can see your screen stuck. Ketki, do you want to take over and see if there's another question?
Sure. So I think that's it. These are the questions we had got. So wow, this was actually such an insightful discussion, from learning about some leading D&I practices to increasing our knowledge on this subject. I am confident that D&I leaders and the students who have joined us today have multiple takeaways from this Charcha. And on behalf of Team IDF, I would like to thank our speakers for taking out time from their busy schedule and for this thought-provoking discussion. And I will also like to thank our audience for keeping this session interactive and spending time out from their busy schedule with us. We'll be back with our next D&I Charcha topic. So thank you so much, speakers. It was really a wonderful discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so
everyone.
much.
Bye, Sujata.
Thanks,
Bye, Sonia. Bye, Sachin. Thank you.
Bye-bye.